Hi guys, these are the remaining two sections of Hope, Despair, and Memory by Elie Wiesel. Section 2. Remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently, so insistently in the Bible. It is incumbent upon us to remember the good we have received and the evil we have suffered. New Year's Day is also called the Day of Memory. On that day, the day of universal judgment, man appeals to God to remember. Our salvation depends upon it. If God wishes to remember our suffering, all will be well. If he refuses, all will be lost. Thus, the rejection of memory becomes a divine curse, one that would doom us to repeat past disasters, past wars. Excuse me. Nothing provokes so much horror and opposition within the Jewish tradition as war. Our abhorrence of the wars reflected in the paucity of our literature and warfare. After all, God created the Torah to do away with iniquity, to do away with war. Warriors fare poorly in Talmud. Judas Maccabeus is not even mentioned. Bar Kokhba is cited, but negatively. David, a great warrior and conqueror, is not permitted to build the temple. It is his son Solomon, a man of peace, who constructs God's dwelling place. Of course, some wars may have been necessary or inevitable, but none was ever regarded as holy. For us, a war is a holy contradiction in terms. War dehumanizes, war diminishes, war debases all of those who wage it. The Talmud says, it is the wise men who will bring about peace, perhaps because wise men remember best. And yet it is surely human to forget, even to want to forget. The ancients saw it as a divine gift. Indeed, if memory helps us to survive, forgetting allows us to go on living. How could we go on with our daily lives if we remain constantly aware of the dangers and ghosts surrounding us? The Talmud tells us that without the ability to forget, man would soon cease to learn. Without the ability to forget, man would live in a permanent, paralyzing fear of death. Only God and God alone can and must remember everything. How are we to reconcile our supreme duty towards memory with the need to forget that is essential to life? No generation has had to confront this paradox with such urgency. The survivors wanted to communicate everything to the living: the victim's solitude and sorrow, the tears of mothers driven to madness, the prayers of the doomed beneath a fiery sky. They needed to tell the child who, in hiding with his mother, acts softly, very softly. Can I cry now? They needed to tell the sick beggar who, in a sealed cattle car, began to sing as an offering to his companions, and of the little girl who, hugging her grandmother, whispered, "Don't be afraid. Don't be sorry to die. I'm not." She was 7. That little girl who went to death without fear, without regret. Each one of us felt compelled to record every story, every encounter. Each one of us felt compelled to bear witness. Such were the wishes of the dying, the testament of the dead. Since so-called civilized world had no use for their lives, then let it be inhabited by their deaths. The great historian Shimon DeBove served as our guide and inspiration. Until the moment of his death, he said over and over again to his companions in the Ragat ghetto, "Jews, write it all down." His words were heeded. Overnight, countless victims become chroniclers and historians in the ghettos, even in the death camps. Even members of the Sadara Kamadas, those inmates who were forced to burn their fellow inmates' corpses before being burned in turn, left behind extraordinary documents. To testify became an obsession. They left us poems and letters, diaries and fragments of novels, some known throughout the world, others still unpublished. After the war, we reassured ourselves that it would be enough to relate a single night in Treblinka to tell the cruelty, the senselessness of murder, and the outrage born of indifference. It would be enough to find the right word and propitious moment to say it, to shake humanity out of its indifference and keep the torturer from torturing ever again. We thought it would be enough to read the world a poem written by a child in a terrorist ghetto, to ensure that no child anywhere would ever again have to endure hunger or fear. It would be enough to describe a death camp selection to prevent the human right to dignity from ever being violated again. That ends section 2. Here is section 3. We thought it would be enough to tell of the tidal wave of hatred which broke over the Jewish people for men everywhere to decide once and for all to put an end to hatred of anyone who is different, whether black or white, Jew or Arab, Christian or Muslim, anyone whose orientations differ politically, philosophically, sexually. A naive undertaking, of course, but not without a certain logic. We tried. It was not easy. At first, because of the language. Language failed us. We would have had to invent a new vocabulary, for our own words were inadequate, anemic. And then, too, the people around us refused to listen, and even those who listened refused to believe, and even those who believed could not comprehend. Of course, they could not. Nobody could. The experience of camps defies comprehension. Have we failed? I often think we have. If someone had told us in 1945 that in our lifetime religious wars would rage on virtually every continent, that thousands of children would once again be dying of starvation, we would not have believed it. Or that racism and fanaticism would flourish once again, we would not have believed it. Nor would we have believed that there would be governments that would deprive a man like Lech Walesa his freedom to travel merely because he dares to dissent. And he is not alone. Governments of the right and the left go much further, subjecting those who dissent, writers, scientists, intellectuals, to torture and persecution. How to explain this defeat of memory? How to explain any of it, the outrage or the apathy which continues unabated. Racism itself is dreadful, but when it pretends to be legal and therefore just, when a man like Nelson Mandela is in prison, it becomes even more repugnant. Without comparing apartheid to Nazism and to its final solution, for that defies all comparison, one cannot help but to assign the two systems in their supposed legality to the same camp. And the outrage of terrorism, of hostages in Iran, the cold-blooded massacre in the synagogue in Istanbul, the senseless death in the streets of Paris. Terrorism must be outlawed by all civilized nations, not explained or rationalized, but fought and eradicated. Nothing will justify the murder of innocent people and helpless children, and the outrage of preventing men like Andrei Sakharov, Vladimir in Mashashvili, Ida Nudel, Joseph Biguan, Nikwan Bralada, Zakhar Zoshin, and all of those others known and unknown from leaving their country. And then there is Israel, which after 2,000 years of exile and 38 years of sovereignty still does not have peace. I would like to see this people, which is my own, able to establish the foundation for a constructive relationship with the Arab neighbors as it has done with Egypt. We must exert pressure on all those in power to come to terms. And here we come back to memory. We must remember the suffering of my people, as we must remember that of the Ethiopians, the Cambodians, the Boat people, Palestinians, and the Mesquite, Indians, the Argentinians. The list seems endless. Let us remember Job, who, having lost everything, his children, his friends, his possessions, and even his argument with God, still found the strength to begin again, to rebuild his life. Job was determined not to repudiate the creation, however imperfect, that God had entrusted to him. Job, our ancestor, Job, a contemporary, his ordeal concerns all humanity. Did he ever lose his faith? If so, he rediscovered it within his rebellion. He demonstrated that faith is essential to rebellion and that hope is possible beyond despair. The source of his hope was memory, as it must be ours. Because I remember, I despair. Because I remember, I have the duty to reject despair. I remember the killers. I remember the victims, even as I struggle to invent 1,001 reasons to hope. There may be times where we are powerless to prevent injustice, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. The Talmud tells us by saving a single human being, man can save the world. We must be powerless to open all the jails and free all the prisoners, but by declaring our solidarity with one prisoner, we indict all jailers. None of us is in a position to eliminate war, but it is our obligation to denounce it and to expose it in all of its hideousness. Wars leave no victors, only victims. I begin with the story of the best, and like the best, mankind needs to remember more than ever. Mankind needs peace more than ever, for our entire planet, threatened by nuclear war, is in danger of total destruction. A destruction only man can provoke, only man can prevent. Mankind must remember that peace is not God's gift to his creatures, it is our gift to each other. Very powerful.